The hostess didn't even try to hide it. She looked Winifred up and down. The sensible shoes, the cardigan with the loose button at the second eyelet, the silver hair pinned back with the kind of clip you buy 3 for $1 at the drugstore. And her expression didn't change. That was almost worse than a sneer. A sneer at least acknowledges you exist. "Do you have a reservation?" she asked, the way you'd ask someone if they had the correct bus stop. Winifred Agnes Holbrook said yes, she did. The hostess, young, polished, wearing the kind of earrings that cost more than Winifred's first car, tapped at her tablet without looking up. "Under what name?" "Holbrook." A pause. More tapping. "I don't see it. Try Holbrook, Winifred, or it may be under the Meridian Group." That got a flicker. The hostess looked up for just a second, then back down. "I'm showing a Meridian Group reservation for 7 o'clock. That's a private dining party. You'd need to be on their guest list." "I'm aware," Winifred said. "I arranged it." The hostess smiled the smile that people use when they don't believe you but don't want to say so directly. "Why don't you take a seat by the bar, and I'll have someone check for you." Winifred did not take a seat by the bar. She stood exactly where she was, hands folded over her small clutch purse, and waited. She had been waiting 67 years for people to figure out who she was. A few more minutes wouldn't kill her. The Ashworth Hotel in downtown Charlotte had opened its restaurant, Callaway's, 18 months prior. The reviews had been excellent. The chef, a 32-year-old named Felix, who had trained in Lyon, had made the local papers twice. The dining room could seat 200, and on a Thursday evening in October, most of those seats were filled. Business dinners, anniversary couples, a cluster of women celebrating something near the window with champagne already open. Winifred had been to the soft opening. She'd sat at a corner table with her daughter-in-law and eaten the duck confit and pronounced it very good, though she thought the sauce was slightly oversalted. She'd kept that opinion to herself because it wasn't the point of the evening. The point of the evening was to see the room work. She'd watched the waitstaff move, watched the tables turn, watched the kitchen window for timing. She had done this in 14 restaurants, in 9 cities over the past 4 decades. She knew what to look for. What she had not done, not once in those 40 years, was announce herself when she walked through a door. She saw no reason to start tonight. The bar was to her left. A man in his mid-40s in a well-cut jacket was watching her from his stool, not unkindly, just with the mild curiosity of someone with nothing better to do. She didn't look at him. She looked at the hostess stand, where the young woman was now speaking in a low voice to a colleague, a man in his late 20s, with a manager's pin on his lapel. His name was Brandon. Winifred would learn that shortly. Brandon came over with the practiced stride of someone who has been trained to look confident while de-escalating. He was good at it. His face was arranged into something that was meant to read as helpful, but landed just slightly short. "Good evening," he said. "I understand there may be some confusion about your reservation." "No confusion on my end," Winifred said pleasantly. "I have a standing arrangement with this restaurant for the first Thursday of each month. The Meridian Group holds a private dinner in the Callaway Room. I believe the reservation was confirmed Tuesday by my assistant, a woman named Patrice, who spoke with someone named Greg." Brandon blinked. "Our events coordinator is named Greg." "Yes, then you can call Greg." Another blink. "He's not on tonight." "Then you can call him at home." Winifred kept her voice level. She was not angry. She had been here before, in different restaurants, different lobbies, different boardrooms, and she had learned a long time ago that anger only gives people a reason to dismiss you. Or you can check the events file, which I would assume is accessible. Brandon straightened slightly. The helpful expression was still there, but something underneath it had shifted. He was recalibrating. She could see it happening, the small interior adjustment that people make when they start to suspect they may have made a mistake. "If you'll give me just a moment," he said. "Of course," Winifred said. He went back to the stand. She watched him pull up something on the tablet, scroll, frown, scroll again. The hostess leaned in to look. They conferred in whispers. The man at the bar was still watching. He'd stopped pretending not to. Winifred had grown up in Greensboro, the youngest of 5 children, in a house where the heat sometimes didn't work in January. And the kitchen ceiling had a water stain shaped like the state of Florida. Her father had driven a delivery truck for 31 years. Her mother had cleaned houses. They were not poor in the way that becomes a story. They were poor in the ordinary, grinding way that doesn't make the news, that just requires you to be very careful about everything, all the time, without anyone noticing how careful you're being. She had been careful. She had been extraordinarily, relentlessly careful. She had worked her way through community college on a food service scholarship, the irony of which she had not appreciated until much later, and transferred to UNC on a partial academic grant. She had taken every job she could find. She had married a man named Robert Holbrook at 24, had 2 children, lost Robert to a stroke at 51, and kept going, because stopping was not something she had ever really learned to do. The first restaurant had been a diner in Raleigh, 1987, 44 seats, a busted espresso machine, a line cook who showed up reliably 3 days out of 5. She'd bought it with a loan she'd spent 2 years convincing a bank to give her. She had turned it into a place that made the Alternative Weekly's best breakfast list 3 years running. She had sold it in 1994 and bought 2 more. The Meridian Group now held 31 restaurants across the Southeast. The Ashworth Hotel's Callaways was the newest addition to their portfolio. Winifred had negotiated the partnership herself across a conference table in this very building 7 months ago. She hadn't mentioned any of this to Brandon. It hadn't seemed relevant yet. Brandon came back. He was moving differently now. The stride had changed, a little faster, a little less studied. Behind him, the hostess was on the phone. "Mrs. Holbrook," he said. And the shift in register was subtle but unmistakable. She was now a name, not a question. "I sincerely apologize for the confusion. The Callaway room is prepared and your other guests have actually already begun arriving. I can take you through directly." "Thank you," she said. He led her past the main dining room, through a set of glass-paneled doors, into the private room at the back. It was set for 14, white linen, low centerpieces, the good stemware. 8 of the seats were already occupied. Her operations director, 2 regional managers, the hotel's general manager, a couple of board members she'd known for 20 years. They stood when she came in, not as a performance, just because they always did. Her operations director, a tall man named Charles, pulled out her chair. "We were starting to wonder, small delay at the front," she said, and sat down. And that was the end of it as far as she was concerned. What she did not see, because she had her back to the glass doors, was Brandon standing just outside the room, watching the way the 14 people in that room oriented toward her, the way the conversation arranged itself, the way the waiter who appeared with her water addressed her by name and asked if she wanted her usual sparkling or still. He stood there for a moment. Then he went back to the front of the house. If this were a simple story, it would end there. The powerful woman is recognized. The obstacle is removed. Justice is served with the amuse-bouche. But the evening wasn't finished. At 8:15, a man came into the main dining room and sat at a table near the kitchen. He was loud in the specific way that some men are loud. Not shouting, exactly, but occupying more acoustic space than was allocated to him, his voice carrying easily to the next table and the one after that. He ordered immediately, before his companion, a younger man who looked like he might be a nephew, had finished reading the menu. He sent back his water glass because he preferred flat to sparkling. He questioned the server, a young woman named Adazes, about the provenance of the lamb in a tone that suggested he expected her not to know. She knew, she told him. He looked surprised, and not pleasantly so. His name was Roger. His Winifred didn't know this yet. A daisy came through the glass doors midway through the main course to inform the beverage manager of a table request. She moved quickly, and her expression was carefully neutral, which is a particular kind of expression that people in service jobs develop when something is wrong and they are not yet certain how wrong. Winifred noticed. She noticed because she had spent 40 years watching the way people move through restaurants, and she knew that particular expression intimately. She had worn it herself once, a very long time ago. She excused herself from the table. In the hallway outside the private room, she stopped Adaze. "What's happening at that table?" Winifred asked. Adaze paused. The neutral expression flickered. "I'm managing it, ma'am. I can see that. I'm asking what's happening." A breath. "The gentleman at 14. He's been." She searched for the word. "Particular. Particular how?" Adaze glanced toward the dining room. "He told me I should find a job more suited to my abilities, when I didn't understand his wine preference fast enough." The words landed quietly. That was the thing about that kind of cruelty. It usually arrived quietly, in the middle of things, dressed up in the language of high standards. "Did you report it?" "I mentioned it to Brandon. And?" "He said to do my best to accommodate him." Winifred looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "Give me 30 seconds." She walked back into the private room, leaned down to Charles, and said 3 sentences in a low voice. Charles nodded once. Then she walked out into the main dining room. Table 14 was near the south wall, half shielded by a decorative partition. Roger was mid-sentence when Winifred arrived beside the table. He was talking to his companion about something. A deal, a percentage, someone who hadn't delivered what they'd promised. His voice carried, it always had. He didn't stop when she appeared. Why would he? She was a small, older woman in a cardigan, appearing at the edge of his peripheral vision, a person who didn't register as requiring his immediate attention. She waited. He finished his sentence. He picked up his fork. Then he looked over with the particular impatience of someone who expects to be waited on, and said, "Can I help you?" "I wanted to introduce myself," Winifred said. "I'm Winifred Holbrook." "Good for you," Roger said. His companion, the nephew or whoever he was, glanced up from his plate and seemed to catch something in the air. He was young enough to still read rooms correctly. "The Meridian Group," Winifred continued pleasantly. "We own this restaurant." Roger's fork didn't quite make it back to his plate cleanly. "I make it a point," she said, "to speak personally with guests who have a difficult experience, and also with guests who create them." She let that sit for exactly 1 beat. Adaze is one of the best servers this restaurant has. She's been with us since we opened. I'd be very sorry to lose her because someone made her shift unpleasant enough that she considers finding somewhere else to work. Roger had found his face again. It wasn't a friendly face. "I'm a paying customer. If the service isn't up to standard." "The service," Winifred said, "is excellent. I've watched it for 18 months. What happened tonight at this table isn't a service problem." She tilted her head slightly. "You're welcome to finish your meal. I've asked the kitchen to send out the chocolate soufflé on us. It takes 22 minutes and it's worth it. But I want to be honest with you because I think honesty is the beginning of a good dining experience." She paused. "If you speak to my staff the way you spoke to Adaze tonight, I'll ask you not to come back. That's not a threat. It's just the way we run things here." Roger stared at her. His companion was studying his bread plate with intense concentration. "Enjoy your evening," Winifred said, and walked back toward the private room. She almost made it. Behind her she heard Roger say something to his companion. She didn't catch the words, only the tone, which was dismissive, the sound of a man reassembling his dignity in private. Fine. She'd said what she came to say. What she didn't expect was Brandon, who materialized at her elbow as she reached the glass doors. "Mrs. Holbrook," he said. He was holding himself differently than he had at the beginning of the evening. Less managed. More uncertain, in a way that felt genuine rather than performed. "I owe you an apology." She looked at him. "At the front when you arrived," he said. "I didn't handle that well. I should have." He stopped, tried again. "I should have looked at the file before I made assumptions. And I should have acted faster when Adaze came to me about table 14. Winifred studied him for a moment. He was young, maybe 28, and he had the look of someone who had just spent the last hour reviewing his own behavior and not liking what he found. That was not nothing. Some people spent an entire lifetime not doing that particular review. "Where are you from?" she asked. He blinked at the change of direction. "Greensboro." She felt something shift quietly somewhere behind her sternum. "I grew up in Greensboro," she said, "off Bessemer Avenue." "I'm from the east side," he said. "Cone Boulevard." She nodded. Two kids from Greensboro, standing in a restaurant hallway in Charlotte, 40 years and a great deal of distance between them, and also none at all. "Brandon," she said, "the apology is accepted. What I want from you going forward is simpler than an apology." "Yes, ma'am." A Daisy should not have had to tell you twice. When someone on your staff comes to you with a problem, that problem is already past the point where they were hoping to handle it alone. That means it's serious. Treat it that way. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yes, ma'am, I understand." "Good." She reached for the door handle. "The souffle at table 14 is on me. Make sure the kitchen knows." "Already done," he said. She looked at him again. Saw something in his face that was different from earlier. Less the careful mask of someone doing their job, and more the expression of someone who had learned something tonight and knew it. "Good," she said again, and went back to her dinner. She didn't learn Roger's last name that evening. She didn't need to. What she did learn from Charles, who had quietly asked around, was that Roger was a commercial developer who had been attempting for the past several months to purchase a property in the Noda neighborhood. A property that happened to be in a negotiating process with a real estate trust that Winifred's company had a financial interest in. That was probably coincidence. She thought it probably was. But she did mention it, briefly, to her board member on the left, who mentioned it to his colleague, who said the name with the particular tone of recognition that means a reputation precedes someone, and not the good kind. None of this affected Roger's souffle, which arrived at his table at 8:47, 22 minutes after she'd ordered it, perfectly risen, as promised. He didn't send it back. The dinner ended at 10. The Charlotte evening was still warm. That particular October warmth that feels borrowed, the last of it before the cold comes in for good. And Winifred stood outside the hotel for a few minutes while she waited for her car. Charles stood with her, not talking, which was one of the things she appreciated about him. Her daughter had called twice during dinner. She would call her back, in the car, and her daughter would ask how it went, and Winifred would say fine, and her daughter would ask if she'd eaten something reasonable. And Winifred would say yes, duck. And her daughter would say she was glad, and that would be most of it. That was most things. Most of what mattered happened quietly, between ordinary sentences. She thought about a Daisy. She thought about the neutral expression on her face in the hallway. The one that people develop when they've been managing something for long enough that managing it becomes its own kind of exhaustion. She would follow up tomorrow. Not because it was a liability issue, though it was. Because a Daisy was good at her job and deserved to work somewhere, she didn't have to use that expression. She thought about Brandon. She thought about Greensboro, about Bessemer Avenue and Cone Boulevard, and all the distance between a starting point and a Thursday evening in October, standing outside a hotel you have a financial stake in. She hoped he would remember tonight. She thought he might. The ones who can sit with their own discomfort long enough to actually look at it. Those ones usually do. Her car came. Charles held the door. She got in, and the city passed by the window in its ordinary way. Lights, traffic, the brick faces of buildings holding whatever their buildings hold. And she called her daughter and said fine, and said yes, duck, and meant it. "I want to say something here, directly to you, because I think it matters. There's a version of this story where the point is the revelation, where the whole thing builds to the moment Roger discovers who Winifred is, or the moment Brandon finally checks the files, or the moment the room stands up when she walks in. And those moments are real. They happened. I'm not saying they don't count, but I've thought about what Winifred Holbrook's life actually looks like, what those 40 years of building something actually require, And I don't think the revelation is the point. The point is the cardigan, the sensible shoes, the fact that she walked into that restaurant without announcing herself, without wearing her resume on her face, without needing the room to already know what she'd done before she sat down at her table. She'd had 67 years to learn that her value was not located in other people's recognition of it. That's not a small thing. That's maybe the biggest thing. I think about how many people in that dining room. Roger, the original hostess, even Brandon for a moment, looked at Winifred Holbrook and made a decision in under 3 seconds. Based on what she was wearing, based on her age, based on the way she held her purse. I think about all the information they decided they had just from that, and I think about how wrong they were, and how completely ordinary that wrongness is, how often it happens in restaurants and lobbies and conference rooms and everywhere else, to people who don't own 31 restaurants, to people who are just trying to have dinner. Winifred didn't do anything dramatic tonight. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't make a scene. She stood where she was and waited for people to figure out who she were dealing with. And when they got it wrong, she corrected them. And when someone on her staff was hurt, she walked out into the dining room and said so. And when a young man from Greensboro apologized, she accepted it, because she knew something about being from Greensboro, about starting somewhere hard and moving through it, about the long work that no one sees until suddenly someone does. Here's what I know. Dignity isn't something you're assigned at the front desk of a restaurant. You either carry it in, or you don't. Winifred carried it in, so did Adaze. So I would guess, does Brandon? From here on out,